Thank you, Alan Brinkley, for putting the Law School for the People back together again for the what year? 25th. Thank you, People's Law School. Thank you, people, for coming here to attending. Thank you, people out there viewing this wonderful program that educates the public. It's a great public service, teaching our communities about the various current trends in the law and the various aspects of law. I'm frequently asked the question, Phil, you've been doing this for so long, 34 years, 34 and a half. Why did you choose DUI defense as a specialty in the law? And I did that for two reasons. I chose DUI defense. The first reason is that I get to practice criminal law, criminal defense law, when the person that I'm representing typically doesn't fit a criminal profile. Drinking and driving goes across the gamut of the socioeconomic people. The second reason I chose DUI defense is that I graduated from law school in 1979, and the most significant changes in Alabama's DUI law took place the very next year, in 1980, in that for the first time, mandatory suspensions of driver's license took place. And I could foresee that, yes, that's going to be a fertile ground for litigation representing people across the socioeconomic spectrum. Also in that law, they passed a law, but prior to the 1980 law, it was very common to just hire a lawyer for a couple of $100. He'd go down to the justice of the peace, the local courtroom, and plead the guy guilty to a lesser included offense of reckless driving. In 1980, they passed a law that says you cannot reduce a DUI down to reckless driving anymore. So fast forward that to current day, and I was asked to talk about a current trend. And what I'm seeing now are these things called diversion programs. Diversion programs, not only does the DUI, it doesn't get reduced, it goes away altogether. The Mothers Against Drunk Drivers are practically non-existent in this area. I don't know, I assume that has some impact on what's going on, but now because of the dollar, prosecution agencies they see this as a way of making money, and they say, we'll start this diversion program. You, Mr. or Miss person who got arrested for DUI, you pay us the money. Don't get a lawyer. You don't need a lawyer. You're going to pay us an application fee of $500, pay so much a month, and then at the end of a certain period of time, the DUI just goes away altogether. What do you think about that? I don't know, but you members of the public, if you have a comment to make about that, because it's being driven by money. It's not being driven by justice. It's being driven by money. So if you have a comment, my email address, which I hesitate to give, but it's duilawyer@aol.com. duilawyer@aol.com. I'm here tonight to introduce my law partner, George Flowers. Back in 1999, I was driving home on a Tuesday afternoon down Whitesburg Drive, and I got a call from my DUI defense lawyer buddy, Tommy Kirk, down in Montgomery. He said, Phil, I've got this prosecutor down here that beats me every time I try cases against him. He's young and he's energetic and he's a good lawyer, and do you have an opening in your law firm for a lawyer? Well, I interviewed him within a day or two and hired him, and he's been with me now for 15 years. George Flowers, he has one of the best work ethics, one of the best work habits, best demeanor, one of the smartest lawyers I know. He's respected in every court that we practice in, which is Central and North Alabama. I'm very proud and privileged to introduce to you tonight my law partner, George Flowers.
I can honestly say that's the nicest thing Phil's ever said to me. So, I'm George Flowers, and it really is my pleasure being here. One of the things that I really do enjoy is speaking to people and and really just for purposes of education, all right? I want to tell you a little bit about myself first so you can kind of know who I am and where I came from in this. What I do for a living is DUI defense, and I can tell you I love my job. I think I have an absolutely fantastic job. I love what I do. I wouldn't want to do anything else in the practice of law, okay? When the day comes that, if the day ever comes that I can't do this anymore, then I'm going to be at Walmart saying, "Welcome to Walmart," and that'll probably be the end of me there. But I am from a small town in southeast Alabama. It's called Dothan. It's not so small anymore, but when I was growing up there, it was a pretty small place back in the late 60s and 70s. And I grew up like most young men in a rural area, and I grew up with hunting and fishing and playing with dogs and rolling in the mud and this sort of thing. And it was a rural area where we lived as well. I was very fortunate to get to go to college, and it was during college. You know, a lot of times you'll hear people say, "Well, what did you want to do when you grow up? Did you know that you wanted to be a lawyer when you were growing up?" My gosh, I can tell you, I had no idea what I wanted to be. I wanted to be everything from an astrophysicist to an actor, to a truck driver. I mean, I had, who knows? You know, I cannot tell you at what point that that I decided really on a career path with any great specificity. But I do kind of remember a little bit of it, of the night that I said I'm going to go to law school. And the night that I decided I was going to go to law school, I was actually majoring in math and computer science while I was in college. And I was stuck in some kind of lab, and it was a Saturday night, and it was about 2 a.m., and I'd been there since Thursday, working on some kind of, and you know what, I think it was a program to program street lights, okay, and to make all the street lights of a city coordinate so you could drive at the same speed through it. And I'd been there for like 3 days working on this thing, and it hit about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I think at that moment, that was when I said, man, I probably ought to go into something else, because that just was killing me. So it was sometime after that I ended up going on to law school, and I was very, very fortunate. Phil told you that one of my first jobs that I got was in a DA's office. And I can tell you, you know what, anybody that goes to law school or anybody that comes out of law school, I actually think working in a DA's office is one of the best experiences that you can ever get. I loved my time. It was in the Montgomery County DA's office. You know what? I loved my time there. It was a tremendous experience. And Phil gave you a very, very generous version of what really happened. Here's the rest of the story. And so I'm a young man, brand new, going to work in this DA's office, and I had a big bushy full head of hair back then too. I looked good. I thought I was something special back then. I thought, hey, I'm a heck of a trial lawyer. And I got in there and I started trying a few cases, and I went, I'm actually pretty good at this. And then I started trying cases with this guy down in Montgomery by the name of Tommy Kirk. And I am extremely fortunate. I have 2 mentors as far as lawyers go. And the first one is this fellow by the name of Tommy Kirk, and the second one is Phil Price. Well, I started trying cases against Tommy Kirk, and man, I'm losing everything. I can't believe the cases that I'm losing. In fact, I remember one time losing a case, and I didn't even know how I lost the case, okay? Absolutely true. And this happened. But what I learned, it was such a magnificent experience, because what I did and what I learned was not to make the same mistake twice. You know, and that seems like just such an easy lesson, but every time I would try a case and every time I'd lose a case, I would take that and I would get something from it, and I'd say, well, hell, he isn't going to beat me that way again, and I would do something different. And you know, and then eventually eventually we got to the point where Tommy was recruiting Phil to move me out of town. So, but it was really a great experience. Then I came to work with Phil, and I can really tell you it was great seeing how a real defense attorney's mind works, and somebody that genuinely is interested in following the law and high standards. And one of the things that I was so fortunate about in my, we'll call it formative years as a DA, was I was in an office that had extremely high standards. I practiced in front of a judge, her name was Lynn Bright, who had extremely high standards. She'd rule against me like that if I didn't do everything I was supposed to. You know, and I came up here and then I started working with somebody who had extremely high standards as well. And you know, I have found that I actually function best in that environment, and I actually enjoy that environment. I have told judges in this county that, you know what, high standards are what this whole thing is about. You know, lawyers should be required to maintain the highest standards in court every time, and you know what, if they don't do it, they should lose, right? Doesn't matter on which side you're on. If you're not doing everything the way you're supposed to do and you're not maintaining the highest standards, well, you're not supposed to win that case. But, so, those were really the lessons that I learned, and I really try harder than just about anybody I know to try to maintain those high standards. Now, as I said, you know, why am I here? Well, there's a couple of things, you know, of why I'm here, and you know, I do enjoy speaking to a crowd, and in fact, you know, it's a there's an old story, but you know, back when I was in my formative years and I didn't quite know what I thought about doing, you know, and starting out, one of the things I actually considered doing was becoming a preacher down there, and moved back to Dothan and become a preacher. And well, and I remember one day I was at a sermon and the preacher looked down and he said, you know, those of you that want to be good, those of you that want to be clean, those of you that want to be honest, now, I want all of you to move up next to this wall. He said, now, those of you that are going to keep on sinning and are going to keep on rolling dice and drinking whiskey, I want you to line up next to this wall. Well, I'll tell you what, you know, everybody starts scooting over to this wall, and, you know, there was me and a couple of other folks that were kind of scooting over towards this one, and you know, I was kind of stuck in the middle. I didn't really know which way to go, for this way or this way. And the preacher looked down at me and he said, what's wrong, son? Do you want to be good? Do you want to be honest? Do you want to be clean? And I said, I do, preacher, but I just got to tell you, I mean, I want to be honest, I want to be clean, but I sure do like whiskey, and you know, I like the lady folks, and I've rolled a lot of dice, I got to admit. And he said, well, then come stand up next to me, son. I think you've been called to preach. So, you know, but, you know, taking all that in consideration, I really kind of thought that probably wasn't the way I ought to go. But what we're doing here today, and one thing that I love about this program, is that we are not here to sell you on a product. I am not here, I want to assure you, I am not here to try to sell you on anything, to try to even actually try to convince you of anything. What I want to do for you and everybody else in this place is I just want this to be some sort of moderately educational program so that when you leave here today, you are going to be able to say, you know what, I actually learned something. And if you come out of this with one or two things that you go, oh wow, I didn't know that, that is interesting, then, you know, then I will have considered this a success. So, the first thing is the history of DUI, and Phil hit a little bit on that, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more. You know, these are the sort of things that hopefully it can make you fascinating at cocktail parties at some point in the future. So, but the DUI has been around for, we're going on about 130 so years now, since the first DUI laws were actually enacted. And Mr. Benz, back in Germany, was actually the first guy to ever invent a car, all right? And it was shortly after, it was actually 11 years after he invented the first car, that actually the first DUI happened. It was in 1897, and it was in London, and it was a taxi cab driver by the name of George Smith. And this is the first recorded, I can remember that because his name is George and my name is George, so, you know. But he is the first person in recorded history to have been convicted of a DUI. And George Smith was a taxi cab driver who apparently had too much while he was driving his taxi cab and drove it through the wall of a building back in 1897, and then subsequently made numerous confessions and went to jail. And then they took him to court and he pled guilty, all right? And he was ordered to pay a fine of 25 shillings, which adjusted for inflation, that's about $70. That all happened in one day. He had his offense, his arrest, and his guilty plea all happened the same day. But, you know, and then he went on to continue driving his taxi cab after that. So, but that's our first guy with a DUI. Now, around 1910, DUI laws started coming into effect in the United States. And the first state to enact one was New York, but shortly after that, Alabama and all the other states enacted DUI laws as well. Now, in 1938, that's when our first legal limit law came into effect. And I know everybody here has heard of this legal limit, or it's actually our illegal limit is really what it is. But our legal limit, and now it is a .08. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But at that time, in 1938, when it was first enacted, it was a .15. And how did they come up with a .15? Well, it's because the American Medical Association and the Safety Board came to the conclusion that .15 was the point where you start having obvious signs of impairment. So, well, it lasted from 1938 till about the early 1970s. And then in the early 1970s, a lot of people don't know this one, it went to a .12. And in fact, it never went to a .12 in Alabama. We missed that. But it went down to a .12 in a lot of states. And then in the very early 80s, all the states after that then shifted to a .10. So it went down again. And then in 1995, because of federal funds, and that is what drives all enforcement. Money is what drives the enforcement of DUI cases. It does, and it has, and it always has, and I believe that it always will. I think it's probably worse now than it's certainly been in my lifetime, but in 1995, then our legal limit, so to speak, went back down to a .08, about half of what it actually originally started out as. Now, what is a DUI? A lot of people, they really just don't know. In fact, you know what? Nobody in here probably knows really what is a DUI. And because it's not what we think it is, okay? Most people here think that a DUI is having something to drink and then driving your car. They think it's drinking and driving. You know what? We've probably seen the commercial. Haven't we all seen, have we seen those commercials that come on where it says, you know, don't drink and drive, or you know, drinking and driving equals go to jail, this sort of thing. We see this. And I am not criticizing those commercials on the point, you know what? Because it's a good safety feature. And to understand what it really is a little more complex than that. But that's what people think that DUI is. DUI, driving under the influence, is actually consuming alcohol to the point that it renders you incapable of safely operating a vehicle. It is not having something to drink and then driving your car. It is not having, you know, these X number of drinks and perhaps even feeling it on some small level and then driving. It is having too much to drink so that alcohol is making you incapable of safely driving. That is why it is perfectly legal for all of us here to have something to drink and drive your car. All right? If it weren't for that, then we would not be able to go to a cocktail party and have a drink and then drive home. Because if it were, then any amount of alcohol, even the most minute amounts, would be having some effect on us at some level. All right? But fortunately, the law does exclude that. And if you're ever thinking about what is a DUI, you have to remember that that driving under the influence, it's not having a drink and driving. It's having too much to drink so that it makes you incapable of safely operating that vehicle. Now, one of the most common things that happen in a DUI case, and I want to run through a generic fact situation with you, okay, on a DUI, and kind of tell you how does this happen. Because a lot of times people think that DUI is somebody going out and getting drunk and then driving your car. And you know what? Sometimes it is. Those people should be arrested. Those people should be convicted. But that's not what it is a lot of the time. And so one of the most common questions that I get asked is, well, how could the officer, how can the officer be wrong? Well, if the cop said it, it must be true. And, there's 2 points to that. The 2 points that I want to make for you. And the first is it's just about opinion evidence. That is what the vast majority of most DUI cases is it is somebody's opinion. Now, and we don't have to see a show of hands here, but how many people here, and just answer it to yourself, how many people here have ever been accused of something that you actually didn't do? Whether it was a speeding ticket, whether it was something that your wife thought you did, whether it was something from in school. But you know what? That happens to us, all right? That does happen sometimes. And how many people here have ever accused someone of something and you were absolutely convinced that they did it, you believed that they did it, my God, and you were so mad at them, my God, you were ready to strangle them because you know they did it, and then later on something happens and you go, ooh, crap, I was wrong, okay? Well, because that's opinion evidence, okay? And it's actually, it's eyewitness testimony. And in fact, it's really interesting because there's been a lot of, and I don't want to delve too much into the, into the science stuff, but there have been so many studies done on eyewitness testimony or on opinion evidence. And it is, when we talk about evidence, in fact, eyewitness evidence is about the least reliable form of evidence that exists. And the reason for that is because our perceptions change, okay? And our perceptions and what we perceive is based upon who we are and what has happened to us, all right? And you know what? There are people out there right now that look at me and you have drawn certain conclusions about me and about who I am, and based on the way that I look or based on the way that I've acted. It may be something very small. It may have been a hand gesture. It may have been something very minute that I said. But you do that. You know what? You may have drawn a conclusion about me based on a positive or more likely bad experience that you had with some other guy wearing a suit, with some other lawyer. And thus you go, oh, yeah, man, I hate those lawyers. Ugh, Flowers has got to be a jerk. And actually, that's not a good example. But in some other, like with Alan, you may draw that conclusion and think, Alan's got to be a jerk, and you would be wrong, okay? So, but that happens. And something happened to me as a kid that at the time I had absolutely no idea of what a formative moment this would be for me. But it has come out to be such an incredibly formative thing that happened to me when I grew up, and it helped me understand this whole concept that I'm talking about right now so well. I was a new kid in Dothan, Alabama. My mother and father had divorced, and my mother had moved back down to Dothan so that she could be near family to have my grandparents help raise me. Well, my best friend, and I was about, oh gosh, I was probably 11, 12 years old, something like that at the time. My best friend was a young guy by the name of Doug, and Doug came over one Friday afternoon and rode his bicycle over to my house, and we were playing, and it got to be dark, and so his mom came over to pick him up, all right? So his mom drove him home. Well, it was the next day, and my mom wanted me to go buy some new shoes. Now, kind of remember this. It's probably about 1978 at this time, 1977, okay? And so my mom wanted me to go buy some new shoes, and I said, yes, ma'am, no problem. And she gave me her credit card and said, you know, put it on this. So I stuck it in my pocket, and I said, okay, I will go and ride my bicycle down to the shoe store, all right? So on the way there, I said, okay, well, I'll return Doug's bike to him as well. So I get on my bicycle, and I'm riding my bicycle, and I'm pretty good at riding my bicycle, and so I've got one hand on my bicycle here, and I've got one hand on my friend's bicycle, and I'm basically pedaling along, and I'm got my friend's bicycle in tow, all right? Well, a cop saw me, and I had done absolutely nothing wrong, but that cop saw me, and what did that cop think? That's right. He saw some kid that he's never seen before with two bicycles. In his mind, at that moment, he was convinced that, he must have stolen that bicycle. So he stops me, puts me over on, the curb, and I tell him what's going on. He doesn't believe me, of course, because his mind was already made up. Well, guess what? At this point, he frisks me. He pats me down for drugs or weapons or what, probably, I'm sure he was doing a weapons search because I was probably such a tremendous threat to him at that time. And had he testified in court, I have absolutely no doubt he would have said, I patted him down for weapons for that. But he patted me down, and at that point, he found a credit card in my pocket. Yeah. And so I've stolen, according to, in his mind, I'd stolen a credit card, I'd stolen this bicycle. He was asking me what house I just robbed, all of this. I am not kidding you. My gosh, I think like 3 police cars showed up on the scene. But this guy, I'm telling you, was 100% convinced that I had robbed somebody's house, all right? Now, in his defense, in retrospect, you know what? I understand how he could have made that mistake. Now, I don't like it, and to this day, it still hurts me, but I understand how he could have made that mistake. He arrested me, he took me to jail, all right, or kid jail. I'm not even sure whatever it was back in Dothan. I actually am not even sure whatever it was. I remember going there, and I remember sitting on some metal chair on the side and crying my head out. And I'd been crying for like, an hour or something like that probably. I think I started crying about, 2 minutes after he stopped me and he told me to sit on the curb. But, I remember sitting over there. And now the thing, kind of the bright moment for me was when I remember my mom storming into whatever, like John Wayne storming Normandy Beach, coming in there, but at this point I had already been placed on, it was what it was, okay? And I had gone through this. I jokingly say that's actually the moment that I decided I wanted to be like my mom when I grew up. So, but that's what happens, and I understand why he did that, but it doesn't make it right, and it doesn't mean that I did that, and those sort of things happen today, And they happen all the time. And nobody wants to believe that, but it happens far more often than you think. And is it in every case? Well, absolutely not. That would be disingenuous to try to tell you that it is. But does it happen? Well, yes, it does. And so what I want to do is I want to give you a scenario where that is really kind of like a normal, if there is such a thing as a normal, but I want to give you kind of a generic DUI, one that I see, on a regular basis. Okay, but a person goes out to dinner, meets somebody for dinner or drinks. I did that last Thursday. Okay, so person goes. I avoided last Friday on purpose. So but the person goes out, meets friends for dinner or drinks, okay? And on your way home, you're stopped for some innocuous traffic violation. You're stopped for speeding, weaving within your lane. That's one of those that I just almost roll my eyes at every time I see he was floating within his lane. I'm just like, oh my Lord. Probably one of my, I kind of hate to call it a favorite, but the one that I probably roll my eyes at worse than any of them is, he had a tag light burned out. He had a burned out tag light, so I stopped him. You know what? That's a nice looking crowd here tonight, and 50% of you folks have a burned out tag light, okay? So, that's right. I guarantee you. I have, and this is so fun, I've never seen one no tag light ticket ever that was not accompanied by some other charge, okay? That's your classic hunting charge, but that's what there are. When you get about 10 o'clock at night, then there are certain tickets that only get written around 10 o'clock at night. You're never going to see a weaving within their lane, all right?
Exactly what is a tag light? Because I didn't know.
Yeah.
What is a tag light?
Heck, man, I don't know. I don't have one on my car. No.
Like on the license tag.
Yeah, no, it's a little light bulb.
Yes.
It's a little light bulb that illuminates your tag. And it's, I guarantee you, when you folks walk out of here tonight, I want every single person out here tonight to go crank your car up, all right? And I'll never know. We'll never know, but heck, Phil gave you his email address. Email him. I encourage all of you. Bomb him with a bunch of emails and tell him if your tag light was burned out. But yeah, go out, crank up your car. See if your tag light's burned out. Anyway, but like I said, that's one of those things. You only see those tickets. If you ever see that ticket, it's only going to take place past 10 o'clock at night. It's never going to take place. And actually it's rarely past 10. I'd say that's like a past midnight ticket because that's looking for some reason to stop you there. But a person gets pulled over for some minor traffic violation like that. They get pulled over, a cop approaches them, generic person like you or you know what, you're just going, crap, I was ready to get home, I'm tired, blah, blah, blah. Cop approaches your window, may I see your driver's license? So, you pull it out, no problem, officer. So, you do it just like I'm doing right here, and I could do this to any guy. Okay. Boom. You know what I just did? I fumbled for my license. It took me too long to produce my driver's license. He says, hold on a minute. And this is what will happen. He says, hold on just a minute. He goes back to his car. You sit there for some time and you're going, wow, why is it taking him so long to run my license? Probably about 5 more minutes goes by. Then you'll notice 1 or 2 more police cars show up. At this point, you're thinking, oh, crap. I'm fixing to have to get, I'm fixing to have to start doing, gymnastics like Nadia Comaneci, on this. So the cop reapproaches your car and he says, you had something to drink tonight. Yes, sir, officer. Yes, sir, I have. And you know what? If you say anything other than I've had 10 drinks, he probably thinks you're lying. All right? If you're like me last Thursday, and you know what? Heck, I really did have 2 drinks last Thursday. But if I got stopped and I said that, boom, he is going to instantly assume that I'm lying. And that will be something that goes into his police report, and that'll be snickered about later. Then, he asks you to step out of the car. Now, as you step out of the car, every single thing you do is being observed, because at this point, you know, whether you are going home or not going home, there's a lot of question at this point in my mind as to whether or not you're really going home by the time that they've asked you to step out. At this time, they're probably generating a case on you. And they're watching every single thing you do. And you know what? You exit your car and, you know, I have seen, and one of the real common things they say is, well, used his car door for balance as he exited the vehicle. Okay? Happens all the time. I see that so much. Well, you know what? Big deal. People use their car door. I don't know what you're supposed to do. I've seen intentionally tried not using his car door for balance. You know, like he's trying to hide something. I mean, so ask you to step out of the car. He then comes back and he'll ask you to step to the rear of the vehicle. And at this point, you know what? Your heart is pounding. You are scared out of your mind because you've never been through this before. If you're not scared out of your mind, it's probably because you've been through it 4 or 5 times, and that's probably the only reason why you're not scared at this point, okay? But you probably are scared out of your wits at this point, and you probably really are thinking, oh crap, I might go to jail. And you know what? You're thinking about your job, you're thinking about your security clearance, you're thinking about your kids that are in school, you know, you're thinking about all these other things. And your heart is racing, and you're even starting to sweat probably out there because you're so nervous. Well, at this point, the officer is going to tell you something like, sir, you know, I want you to perform a series of tests for me. And I want to get into these in just a minute. But then he's going to have you do, literally, I literally call them roadside gymnastics, okay? Because, you know, where else do we see people that walk a line heel to toe, all right? Where else do we have, you know, where in life do we ever see that? I don't. The only time in life I ever see people that are sitting there trying to walk like this is, is when I'm watching the Olympics every 4 years, and I'm watching some 13-year-old gymnast do it, and she even gets to hold her arms out, unlike you, okay? But they'll tell you they want you to hold your arms down to your side and basically walk like you're on a tightrope. And that's not the language that they use, but they say, I want you to walk on this imaginary line. Sometimes they may have one there. More often than not, it's some imaginary line that you're supposed to imagine that you don't step off of. And they want you to walk down in a certain way, and turn in a certain way, and walk back in a certain way, and count in a certain way. And they call this a divided attention test. But what they're doing is they're looking for every single thing at this point that they can mark down. And I have seen some of the most incredibly minuscule things happen. And typically these instructions get given to you a lot quicker than you really understand them. And they will say, do you understand my instructions? And you know what? In your mind you're going, well, yeah, okay, I understand. I understand the instructions, sure. I'm supposed to walk down, I'm supposed to walk down, walk back, blah, 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 blah. You do that one, then they tell you, oh yeah, okay, I've got one more, I've got another one for you to do, sir. They'll have you do another one. Typically it's one where they make you stand on one foot, okay? And they'll tell you, they'll say, hold your hands down to your side. They'll say, hold your hands down to your side, and I want you to raise one foot, and I want you to raise one foot out, point your toe, and begin counting by thousands. 1 through 30. Do not begin until I tell you to begin. You know, it's instructions like this, and except they give them to you a lot faster than I'm doing. I'm actually trying to get you to understand what I'm saying right now. And they'll grade you on if you sway while you're standing on one foot. You know, can you hold it up for the full 30 seconds? And you know what? And if you don't keep it up for the whole time frame, I've had cases where they made them do it for 50 seconds. Okay, I've had cases where it was just, you know, I'm thinking, my gosh, you know, the officer can't do it that well, you know, but if you do anything wrong on that, then those get counted against you. Okay, and they try to use that to determine if you are drunk or not. Well, what happens then, and the last one they may give you is this test where they wave a pen in front of your face. Now, you get arrested at that point, and then you end up going to jail. And then when you're in the jail, then they tell you that we're going to give you a breath test at this point. And it's pretty interesting because what they actually tell you is that, and they say, ma'am, we are going to take your driver's license from you. Basically, they say, we're going to take your driver's license from you if you don't blow into this machine. Okay? Well, what they don't tell you is that they're probably going to take your driver's license from you if you blow, even if you do blow into it. And so, whether you blow into it or don't blow into it, there's a chance if you blow into it, they may not take your driver's license that night. Chance not. I had a case come in very recently where a young man was arrested and blew a .00, all right? And they took his driver's license, went through the whole scenario with him, okay? And the young man blew a .00. But, you know, and then at that point, you are in the court system and you've got a case, and you are very worried about job and security clearance and reporting requirements and all this. Now, talking about those tests that they give you, it's, you know, one of my favorite examples of these tests is from an old TV show, you know, from the old Andy Griffith Show. And I don't even know if the Andy Griffith Show's even on anymore. It should be, if it's not, but I don't see it anymore. But there is a classic episode with Barney Fife, where Barney is real unhappy with Otis's level of sobriety, and he doesn't want him leaving until Barney has figured out if he is, you know, if he is properly sober to be getting out there. And Barney has him do the Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers test, the jumping rope test, and the hopping on one foot test. And if you think about when the Andy Griffith Show was filmed, that was the sort of things that happened, and that's really not that far out. Okay, it was only until relatively recent times that they started doing these more standardized tests. And what happened was in the late 70s and early 80s, in order to and I really think it was pretty much to justify, you know, these legal limit numbers that they've come up with. They did a series of what they called to be validation studies, and like I said, I don't want to get too much into the science aspects of it, but I can tell you, you know, any person that's any statistician looks at these numbers, and it's just absolutely ridiculous. But these tests that they try to have you do, it is, and I'm going to tell you, like the one-leg stand test, that's what they call it, the one where they have you stand on one foot. Under ideal conditions, their own studies show that 1 out of 3 people is going to show drunk from that test under ideal conditions. Right? It's got about a 65% rate. So you know what? if we took about a third of this crowd, all right, I would bet you, I actually think that, I bet you 50% of this crowd, okay? In fact, we could probably go a lot higher than that. But anyway, but a third couldn't do it. This test where they want you to have to walk the line, it came out to be about a third, about 1 out of 3 people would test positive for being drunk from that test. All right, it had a 68% rate, which, and they love touting these numbers that, oh, it's a 68% accuracy rate. Yeah, well, doesn't that mean like 32 people, 32% wrong? Okay. I'm not aware of any field of science, and if there is, boy, it's a pretty bad field of science, but I'm not aware of any area of science where somewhere around a 1/3 false positive rate is acceptable. The other test that they will often give is the one where they hold a pen up in front of your face and they will wave it around in front of your face. And what they're trying to do in that test actually is they're trying to look for what they call it nystagmus. Okay? And what it is it's an involuntary jerking in the eye. For people that have had any medical background or nurses, sometimes doctors in hospitals will do this looking for head trauma and that sort of thing. But there is a method by which these officers are supposed to do it. First of all, there are numerous things that cause involuntary nystagmus, but probably the biggest joke that I've ever seen in this, they probably do this test worse than they ever do any. I've been doing defense work now for 15 years. I've never seen one single cop on video ever do that test correctly. I have never seen one cop on video ever do it according to the criteria that they are actually supposed to do that test. So, and that's 15 years, thousands and thousands of videos. I have never seen it. Okay? I've seen instructional videos where they're not following their own procedures for how they're supposed to do that test. So, but the penalties of DUI, and Phil mentioned something to you about that earlier, about how the penalties of DUI are getting, more and more. They get greater and greater as time goes by, and not all of them are bad. Phil mentioned to you about these diversionary programs, and it is absolutely what he said is absolutely true. There's a few things that have happened in relatively recent times, though, that I think all of us, probably as citizens of Alabama, can probably say, well, yay, that's a good thing. And I am not speaking now as a defense attorney. I'm not speaking for someone that defends these cases. I'm just speaking as a citizen of Alabama. And I'm glad, if you look at some of these things, I think they're probably good things. They have increased the children in the car penalties. Okay? Whereas if a person has kids in the car, nobody is supportive of that. In fact, I don't know anyone. I am not in favor of drunk drivers. Nobody is in favor of drunk driving. Only a fool would be in favor of drunk driving. All right? But what I am in favor of is I am in favor of following the law and people not being convicted when they shouldn't be. But they've come up with these new, they've come up with enhanced penalties for kids. They've come up with what they call super BAC, super high blood alcohol level penalties that get increased. They've also done longer license suspensions. And one of the more interesting little gizmos that they've come up with in recent years, and this was one of those things also that is entirely to do with money, is they have now come up with, if you get convicted of a DUI, there is a high probability, and it's fact-based, but there's a high probability that you're going to be ordered to place this gizmo in your car, that you cannot crank your car without blowing into the gizmo. Now, that on its face doesn't really sound like a problem, all right? And I think most of us could, on our face, go, okay, well, maybe that's not so bad, right? Well, here it is. I'm just going to pass along sort of my humorous, I guess, anecdotal evidence on that thing. And so what I did is, being a renegade, I said, well, hey, this thing's coming. Let me try it out. So I actually went and had one of these things placed in my car for about a month. And every day, I had to blow into this thing to start my car. And what was kind of interesting is the way these things work is, and I can tell you, it sure as heck will prevent you from, it'll be pretty darn tough to be drinking and driving with this thing because it does not, it's pretty good at preventing that. But it's also pretty dang good at preventing your car from starting at 7:30 in the morning when you're just trying to get to work. Everything sets the thing off. I mean everything, because when I had it, I actually did fool around with it some too. Bread can set it off. You cannot eat a sandwich and drive your car, all right? It has recommendations that you don't, don't smoke a cigarette in your car, that you don't, do anything in your car. It will go off from everything. And what makes it even more difficult is it's this, it requires these odd breathing patterns. And you have to like blow into it and then re-inhale into it and do this sort of thing and blow or and hum and this. And I mean, it is the craziest son of a gun that you have ever seen for trying to do this. I actually, when I had this thing, and I mean, I tell you what, I was killing myself with it. It was, I mean, I really did. I was killing myself sticking with this thing for a month. And after about a week, I was just cursing. But I actually drove to Birmingham and back one time with it, and it was, it also will come up just sporadically and make you blow into it. So if you're driving somewhere, it sets off every once in a while. I had to blow into that thing 9 times on the way to Birmingham and back, okay? I hadn't had a drink, I wanted to. Tell you, by the time I got back, I sure as heck wanted to have a drink, but I had to blow into it 9 times from Huntsville to Birmingham and Birmingham on back. And your instructions here, and this is so funny, and I think the plaintiff lawyers may end up, heck, they may end up making some money off this one. All the instructions say you're supposed to pull over on the side of the road. Do not do this while you're driving, okay? But anyway, that's one of those things that's certainly coming down the road too. And a couple of other small points of things that are coming down the road, and these are actually sort of interesting for us too. I think next year when we speak, we're probably going to have some drug limits. They're going to have blood testing done for where they're going to be measuring drug levels in you, and they're going to, because those are coming in states like Colorado, and I think we're probably going to adopt those here and probably this year. And there's also a lot of talk too about lowering the legal limit down to a .05 once again, and so won't that be exciting? So anyway, I'm getting told I'm running too long again. Thank you all very much. It was a pleasure.
Mr. Price and Mr. Flowers and I were talking here today about a real hot topic, and that is what we're seeing on our highways with these lawyers that are advertising on these billboards, making fools of lawyers. That's what I say. And it's an opinion. The people that are doing it are lawyers and my friends, but I've got a real strong opinion about it. I have read, and all the studies show that the number one thing that people hate lawyers for and have the bad rap for is those foolish advertisements. And it embarrasses me every day. I know maybe you have. I'm sure, Phil, you've seen it a bunch where in my negotiations with the other side, my own clients will say, well, if we can't settle it right now, I'll just get a wreck and get a check or something.
533?
Yes. That's it.
I haven't seen any of them personally. I'm just kidding. When I first started practicing law, was right when they changed the rule to allow lawyer advertising. But it seems to have evolved. I mean, lawyers have a bad pitch anyway. We have a thing to overcome in terms of perception by the public. But I think advertising can be done in a responsible and ethical way. But it seems that the advertisements have gone way over to the edge like any other thing, if you will, business. And my one comment would be it's obviously working to some extent because the number of dollars that you see spent, they've got to be getting cases in and turning it over and buying more advertising.
You know, and in our field, probably what we see more than anything else, and what Phil and I do is Phil and I do DUI defense, and it's criminal issues. And we actually do see that too in our field, and we hear about that also from clients. From what happens is you know, if a person gets arrested, then somebody is, you know, going through courthouse files and pulling up their personal information and sending them, you know, basically they get a, you know, a virtual plethora of flyers. And, you know, in those situations, I think it's really, you know, it can be incredibly tacky because somebody's, you know, mother may not know about it, you know, somebody's family member. It's going to some address that's on a driver's license. You know, a spouse, you know, an ex-spouse, you know, a soon-to-be ex-spouse. I mean, so there's all sorts of issues that come in there, and I think I probably hear about it more along those lines than anything else.
Call that jail mail, or that's the name that's, they get the public records from each of the jail facilities, and then the lawyers will, and they said that this is ethical. I don't agree with it, but then that's your target market, and some lawyers get that target market, send a letter to their last known address on file with the courthouse and send them a letter saying, hey, I'm out here, please come and hire me. I heard you got arrested.
What they're doing, if you get arrested, you get a letter in your home mailbox, and it opens up and says, please call us for your defense. We're real good lawyers. Yeah, I think it stinks, and like you say, your mother gets a hold of it or somebody else. And then when you see this on the highway, that just makes people look so foolish.